shiur, which I'm going to give today, was publicized under two topics, two titles. One was that it's a special shiur for Rosh Chodesh Mar Cheshvan, which is tomorrow, and the other is that it's given the title Modern Masters. So over the course of the next few months, Po V'Sham, I'm going to be in and out of this program. Won't necessarily be in the same slot every single week, but I'm going to be giving a course called Modern Masters, which is going to focus on 20 and 21st century thought leaders, okay, amongst OUisrael. And the reason that we picked this particular personality to learn together today is that his yahrzeit is coming up next week on Daled Cheshvan. So we're going to learn about today one of my personal spiritual heroes, and that's Rabbi Klonimus Kama Shapira, Hashem Yikadamav, Zchuso Yagin Aleinu, also known as the Rebbe of Piaseczna, also known as the Eish Kodesh. Now, Rabbi Klonimus Kama Shapira was a descendant of many, many great Hasidic masters, and he himself becomes, at a very young age, first he's orphaned at the age of 3 years old. He becomes a Rebbe by the age of 19 or 20, and he becomes a renowned educator throughout. People will come from across Poland. They would send young men to his network of chadarim within Warsaw, in the Warsaw area. Piaseczna, by the way, is a small kfar just outside of Warsaw, where he first establishes his Hasidic court. He eventually ends up spending the majority of his time, at a certain point in his life, commuting between Piaseczna and Warsaw, where he has many, many Hasidim. And during the siege of the Nazis of Warsaw, he and his family become trapped, if you will, imprisoned, if you will, as residents of the Warsaw Ghetto. And he spends the last 3 years or so of his life in the Warsaw Ghetto. He's often lovingly referred to as the Rebbe of the Warsaw Ghetto. He is one of the last rabbinic personalities surviving in the Warsaw Ghetto. Within the first 18 months of the Rebbe and his family find themselves in the ghetto, he loses in this order his son, his mother, his Rebbetzin, and then finally his daughter-in-law. Basically everyone that he has in the world, all his immediate family perishes. Yet despite all this, he continues to be the voice of hope, of chizuk, of inspiration, of faith for the Jews literally living the depths of hell of the Warsaw Ghetto. So when it becomes clear to the Rebbe of Piaseczna that the Nazis are beginning their machinations to liquidate the ghetto, he gathers together the notes. You see I have all these little scraps, and right? Every rabbi has their shita in terms of how they make their notes for their shiurim. He gathers together all the little notes and transcripts of his various clandestine talks and sermons and shiurim that he gave throughout the time that he was in the Warsaw Ghetto, and he gathers them up and he puts them in a metal milk can. And that milk can is buried together with a very, very extensive archive that's known as the Oneshabos archives. There was a group of Jewish individuals that would meet on Friday evenings to chronicle. They would put down. They would hopefully I hope most of it was written ahead of Shabbos, but they would sit and review together and then place the documentation, what has been happening to the Jews throughout their time in the Warsaw Ghetto. They would gather on Friday night, and then they would place them in these milk cans. So there's a large archive that's hidden away underneath a wall in one of the buildings in the area of the Warsaw Ghetto, and the Rebbe places his writings together with that Oneshabos archives, and he includes a note that's actually published here in the print edition of the Sefer that we're going to learn from, called Eish Kodesh. You can actually see his handwritten note here. Okay, this is his handwriting. He writes a note in Yiddish, and he basically says that to the great soul who discovers these manuscripts, if somehow I've survived the horrendous fate of so many of our brothers and sisters, do me the kindness and bring these manuscripts, see that they're returned to me, Klonimus, in the Warsaw Rabbinate. And he says Klonimus, that's what he calls himself. And he says, if, however, I share their tragic fate. Do me the chesed to make sure these manuscripts make their way to my brother, Rabbi Yeshaya Shapira. Rabbi Yeshaya Shapira made Aliyah to Israel in the 19 teens. He himself was also a Hasidic Admor, a Hasidic Rebbe, who comes to be known as the Admor Hatzioni. He comes to Eretz Israel in the 19 teens. He's one of 3 Hasidic Rebbes that are involved in building the area that's known today as Kfar Hasidim. Next week we'll learn about another one of the personalities involved in building Kfar Hasidim, and he becomes known as the Admar Chalutz. He gives up the traditional Hasidic garb. He starts wearing the long black coat, and on Shabbos he still wears a long black coat, but during the week he basically, the pictures we have him of look like a cowboy, with a cowboy's hat on, with short sleeves, literally riding a horse from yeshuv to yeshuv to give chizuk to the chalutzim. And he becomes lovingly known as the Admor HaChalutz. He becomes a devoted disciple of Rav Kook. There's a beautiful sefer known as Eretz Chayfetz. Okay, it's a beautiful collection of the Torah of Rav Kook that is basically a likut from all of Rav Kook's writings, an edited edition of all of Rav Kook's writings about the sanctity of Eretz Israel, and it's the Admar HaChalutz who publishes that sefer, who edits it and publishes that sefer. And so the Rebbe, the Piaseczna, writes in this letter, please see that these documents make their way to my brother, Rabbi Yeshaya Shapira, living in Eretz Israel. So the Rebbe buries this milk can, and a few months later he's taken to the Troniki work camp where he's enslaved for a few months, and finally he's executed together with many of the other inmates of the Troniki work camp on Daled Cheshvan in 1944. So fast forward to 1951, because obviously the story doesn't end there, because we're going to learn from these writings. So a non-Jewish Polish construction worker, who has to be described, and you'll understand why in a moment, as one of the tzadikei umos ha'olam, one of the righteous amongst the Gentile nations, he discovers these manuscripts. Okay, all these manuscripts of the Oneshabos archive, which are written in Yiddish, and certainly the Rebbe's manuscripts are half Yiddish, half Hebrew, and the Rebbe's works are all loaded with Kabbalistic references. And so this non-Jewish Polish construction worker, who absolutely has no idea what he's found, but he realizes it's something significant. And he remembered that his mother had a distant cousin that he had never met, who was a museum curator in Warsaw. And this is before everyone had one of these, right? So he spends weeks tracking down, okay? There was no Google, okay? He spends weeks tracking down this distant cousin, and he finally brings this archive that he found, this treasure trove that he found, to this distant cousin. And she was also a linguist, and she had other linguists that were involved, and they were able to begin to slowly archive this project, okay? And when it became clear to them that this is something significant, they let it be known to the World Zionist Organization that we found this treasure trove of documentation from the time of the Warsaw Ghetto, the Jews of the Warsaw Ghetto, and the World Zionist Organization sends a representative, a gentleman by the name of Baruch Duvdevani, to Poland. And before Baruch Duvdevani leaves for Poland, the Rebbe's nephew, okay, the son of the Admor HaChalutz, who had become one of the leaders of World B'nai Akiva, he met with Baruch Duvdevani and said, listen, if they really have found a treasure trove of documentation from the Warsaw Ghetto, maybe you'll find some writings from my uncle, the Rebbe of Piaseczna. And so Baruch Duvdevani takes it upon himself, the shlichus, to go and help archive this material that was found, this Oneshabos archive. And it's Baruch Duvdevani who indeed discovers the writings, the hidden writings of the Piaseczna Rebbe, brings them back to Eretz Israel, and a few years later, the Piaseczna Hasidim here in Eretz Yisrael published the first segment of the writings. Subsequently, the other works have also subsequently been published. But the first segment of the writings that was published, they gathered together, and they're the Rebbe's drashot and sichot, or at least what we have left of them, the transcripts of what the Rebbe wrote down, of the various talks that he gave, the sermons that he gave throughout the 3 years that he was in the Warsaw Ghetto. And they titled this work Eish Kodesh, which means a sacred flame. And this becomes the moniker. Today, many people refer to the Rebbe simply as the Eish Kodesh. And I'll tell you something else very powerful. If you Google Baruch Duvdevani Nuremberg trials, go on YouTube, or just go to YouTube and put in Baruch Duvdevani Nuremberg trials. Baruch Duvdevani testified in the Nuremberg trials, and his testimony was shortly after this first edition of the Eish Kodesh had been published, and his testimony was to read excerpts from the Piaseczna Rebbe's own words to describe what was going on to the Jewish people, the torture and the agony that the Jewish people were sustaining at the hands of the Nazis throughout the 3 years that the Rebbe was in the Warsaw Ghetto. I promise you, if you Google and go to YouTube and put in Baruch Duvdevani Nuremberg trials, you'll hear him reading from excerpts from the Rebbe's works. Anyways, this incredible personality, who you'll get to meet a little bit today and learn from a little bit today, was an absolute powerhouse of spirituality, of faith, of emunah, particularly emunah in the different, most darkest of circumstances. Over the past many months, I've had the fortune to speak in a lot of different settings, Baruch Hashem, that keep me busy. And I often find myself, in terms of when we're dealing with how do we contextualize our mitzvah, what we're living through as a Jewish people now, and how do we remain faithful and committed and positive in the midst of all the tragedy that we're seeing around us, I find myself being constantly pulled to the Rebbe's teachings. And you'll see, as we learn together this afternoon, that have these teachings been said at any time or in any context, they'd be inspirational. But when we know his story, we know when these words were shared and what the Rebbe was living through, it makes them even more powerful. So before we actually look at the sheet, I want to, since we're talking about his yard site this week, I want to share with you a beautiful teaching that the Rebbe himself shares in terms of this idea of learning in the merit of a neshama that's departed. We all, for yard site, and it's very common that we give a shiur and we dedicate that shiur in the memory of that departed soul, right? So what's that all about? So the Rebbe points to this is not on your sheet, it's in the Sefer. The Rebbe points to a well-known medrash in the Medrash Tanchuma. And there the Medrash Tanchuma is describing that Moshe Rabbeinu is getting nervous about what his legacy is going to be. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, Misha'ani meit, ein ani nizkar. When I pass on from this world, who's going to remember me? That's what Moshe Rabbeinu is worried about. So Kadosh Baruch Hu says, then don't be ridiculous. Every time the Jewish people open up a Sefer Torah and they read the words, V'yadaber Hashem Moshe, V'yomer Hashem Moshe, v'chulei v'chulei, they're going to remember to Moshe Rabbeinu. It's going to be, and listen to those words, it's going to be as if you, Moshe Rabbeinu, are there together with the Jewish people, teaching them Torah at that very moment. So the Rebbe points to that beautiful Medrash Tanchuma, and he says, therefore, chutz min amirat kaddish, v'limud hamishnayot acharei niftarim, and therefore he says, in addition, beyond just saying Kaddish and learning Mishnah in memory of someone who passed away. Why do we learn Mishnah in memory of someone who passed away? Because the otiyot of Mishnah are the same otiyot as the word neshama, right? So, in addition to those beautiful customs of saying Kaddish and learning Mishnah in memory of someone who's left this world, he says, Tov ahi lahan hashamot, gan keshezochrin otam be'et asiyat mitzvah v'talmud Torah. It's a great kindness for the departed soul, even as we recall them when we do a mitzvah, dedicate a mitzvah in their merit or learn Torah in their merit. But it's important. He says, Lo zechira bilva, but that dedication is not simple intellectual recall. We're not just reciting their name and recalling their name. That's not what's going on. Rather, rak shnit kasher otan lasot mitzvah lilmud Torah yachad. Rather, what are we doing? Why is it a great kindness for that neshama? Just like Hashem answers Moshe Rabbeinu. Don't be ridiculous. Every time they open a Sefer Torah and they read about you, Moshe, it's going to be as if you, Moshe, are there with them, learning together with them, teaching them. So too, when we dedicate any mitzvah or any learning and memory of departed neshama, says the Rebbe, it's as if we're giving that neshama, we're doing a chesed to that neshama, that it can join together with us, learn together with us. And in our case, that we're going to learn together from the Piaseczna Rebbe himself. So having said that, in the Rebbe's own words, we're now going to look at three pieces together from the Sefer Eish Kodesh. L'chaim, Baruch Atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam shakol niyivra. Okay, so we're going to start with, we're going to jump around through Chumash. I'm sorry, I just picked three pieces that I thought we could get through today. We're going to start in Sefer V'Yikra, and we're all familiar with Tazria, the Parsha of Tazria Mitzorah, where we're introduced to the spiritual leprosy known as Sarat. Okay, leprosy is a bad translation. We call it a spiritual leprosy, a spiritual affliction known as Sarat. And Sarat is something that's metaphysical, meaning not only can it afflict our bodies, but it can afflict our clothing, it can afflict the walls of our homes, okay? And specifically, we're going to look at a very, very famous Rashi on these psukim. Okay, just take a look. Text number 1. Ki tavo el eretz Kanaan asher ani noten lachem la'achuzah v'natati negat sarat bebeit eretz achuzatchem. Okay, when you come into the land of Israel and you inherit and you take over the land from the Amorites, the Amorites, but the Amorites, right? The Amoraim, who lived in the land before us, okay? And you're going to inherit the land and take over their homes. And what might you find on the walls of the homes? This mysterious spiritual affliction, okay? But when you come into the house, you have to, and you see such an affliction on the wall, you have to go to the Kohen, okay, and say to the Kohen, it appears to me as if what? There's a affliction on the wall. We're not allowed to diagnose it ourselves, even if we ourselves are indeed Talmidei Chachamim. We're not allowed to make that final diagnosis. Only the Kohen. Okay, we'd have to pick up the phone like I often do and call Reb Nachman Kahana Shlita, and my resident Kohen, and Rabbi Kahana would have to paskin the Shaila for me. Okay. Anyways, we go on a little bit more. We'll just skip to the end. What ends up happening? The house has to be closed for 7 days, and then only after the 7 days are you allowed to return and take over the house. So Rashi, a very famous Rashi, this is text 2. Okay, v'natati negat sarat, and you'll see that Hashem has placed a mark of affliction on the walls of your house. Listen to this unbelievable Rashi. Bisora hi lahem shanagaim ba'im aleihem lefi shetminu amarayim matmaniot shalzav b'kira bateim kol 40 shana shayu Yisrael b'mibar v'idei nega notetz abayinu motza'an. Wow. He says, it's a sign for you. Okay? Listen to Rashi. He says, this affliction, what appears to us, kenega nira li, okay? And it seems like an affliction to me, okay? Appears on the wall, but in reality, why does it appear on the wall? It's a spiritual treasure map, okay? To say what? That those who inherited the land beforehand, they hid treasures in the walls. Okay, and they buried them in the walls, and they left them behind. And it's only when we see those marks that we know what, that eventually we're going to, after the 7 days, we're allowed to come back to the house and remove those stones that were afflicted. And when we remove those stones, Rashi says, what are we going to find? We're going to find those treasures. So the house is struck with an affliction, apparently. And ultimately, what comes from that affliction? treasure, hidden treasure. We find hidden treasure, says Rashi. So listen to what the Piaseczna Rebbe does with that famous Rashi. This is text number 3 on our sheets. V'navi naim kein lama hiskir mitchilat abayit shivat yamim. He says, if we accept Rashi's pshat, right? It's true that the reason why this affliction appears on the wall is what? To be that spiritual treasure map for us, in order that we should find the hidden treasure that's hidden in the walls. So the Rebbe asks a very simple question on Rashi, and that is a what? If that's true, why do we have to wait 7 days? If Hashem wants us to find the treasure, just give us the treasure. What's this? That it has to be. It's an affliction. It looks to me like it's something bad, but ultimately it's hidden treasure. What are we meant to learn from this? And only afterwards can we remove the stones. If really the reason why this nega appears, says the Rebbe, is to tell us that there's a hidden treasure, why do we have to wait 7 days? Okay. And he quotes a Ramban, and a Ramban that's quoted in the Sfarim of his father, okay, and that says that Shenege Batim Mibigadim Shelo Kederach HaTevahin. He says the first thing we have to understand is that what? That when a leprous mark, this spiritual leprosy, this spiritual affliction, which can appear on clothing or on the walls of a house, that is supernatural. You can't explain. It's not like any other contagion, right? It's something supernatural. It's beyond the laws of nature that you would have a leprous mark on the wall, or seemingly leprous mark on the wall or on your clothing. That's supernatural. That's the first thing we have to recognize. Im came rak l'tovat Yisrael legalot hamatmaniyotin. And if that's true, then the only purpose of that nega appearing on the wall is what? For the ultimate good for Am Yisrael, that to reveal those hidden treasures. The lama tzavta atar l'tamei mikodim shivat yamim. And so the Rebbe asks again the same question. Why then does the Torah say we have to what? Wait those 7 days. That the 7 days of impurity, and only then can you go find the hidden treasure. So now look what the Rebbe does with this question. There's a second paragraph. V'hinei b'kavanat ha'torah mitzvotah ein lanu hasaga. The first important yesod of a faithful Jew is that what? That we can never fully understand Hashem's reasoning and the full meaning of Hashem's Torah and mitzvos. Okay, doesn't mean we don't try to find meaning and that we don't try to relate to it in a way that is inspirational to us. But the reality is what we have to recognize, that the reality is that we can't begin to fathom and to perceive that we understand exactly what Hashem intends with giving us the Torah and mitzvot, and exactly what Hashem intends with everything that exists in the world. Okay? That's the first important spiritual yesod, as we say. All right? And then he says, Aval ma'ashem merames lanu afshar ki yodim ma'aminim anachnu shekol ma she'Hashem oseh lanu afilu k'shechas v'chalila malkei otanu hakol l'tovahi. But what we do need to embrace, he says, we can't understand why, but what we do need to embrace and believe firmly is what? That even when Hashem appears to be harming us and striking us, that ultimately what? That there's ultimate good that's going to emerge from those challenging moments and those difficult moments. Talk about a relevant message for us today, and a relevant inspirational message for us today. How do we continue to persevere and put our total trust in the ultimate good of the big picture? My great teacher, Rabbi David Aaron, many of you may have heard of him, Rabbi Aaron, so he gives a beautiful mashal in terms of understanding this point. Then we'll learn the next piece of this from the Rebbe. So if a person goes to an art museum, okay? If you go into an art museum and you see these beautiful tapestries, masterpieces on the wall, right? So when you walk into that art museum, you start to see the full picture on the wall, and it's a masterpiece. But if you were to put your face up directly against the tapestry, what would you see? A bunch of random, ugly, squiggly lines and blotches that make no sense, that we can't make any heads or tails of. Okay? It might even scare us and be ugly to us. He says, but when we take a step back and begin slowly to take in the full tapestry, then those random, ugly blotches and squiggly lines become a piece of a beautiful masterpiece. And that's how we have to look at life, says Rabbi Aaron. There are moments in life where we have difficult, troubling, ugly episodes. Episodes that don't seem to make sense to us. That might confuse us, might frighten us, might sadden us, might terrify us. It's only when we take a step back and work to begin to see the bigger picture and embrace this idea of a bigger picture that slowly we can what? Embrace this idea that there's ultimate good that is eventually going to come from those challenging moments. Okay, so let's go a little bit further. And now the Rebbe is going to say, now he's going to get personal. Aval kisharoim ka'et. What does ka'et mean? What does ka'et mean? Right now. As we're seeing ka'et, as we're seeing right now. Should we maybe close these windows? Is that okay? Thank you. Okay. Yeah. So the Rebbe says, as we're seeing right now, Shelo bisurei haguf levad malkei otanu, that Hashem doesn't seem to be striking us solely physically. But he's also what? We're not only being afflicted physically, but we're also being afflicted by what? By having taken away from us many of the things that we have that bring us closer to Hashem. And he's going to list them. Okay, he's talking about his reality there in the ghetto, the Warsaw ghetto. He says, "Ein cheder l'tinokot shel beit rabban v'lo yeshiva." There's no cheder for the little boys. There's no yeshiva for us to study. V'lo beit hamidrash lipalel b'tzibor v'lo mikvah. And there's no shul for us to daven together in. And there's no mikvah. Uchedom and things like this. As chasa chalila safik hashesh oleh b'kirbenu. Hashar shagam atak havanatay brach l'tova. And therefore, God forbid, what could happen? Because we don't have all those things that are normally our ways to connect to Hashem, what could happen as a result, God forbid? One might begin to question if there's ultimate good that's going to come from this. We might begin to have our faith be damaged, God forbid. Okay. Im l'tova haya lo liyisreinu b'dvarim shikrevu otar leilav v'lo bittul Torah v'tfila v'chasel chalila kimat kol Torah. And if Hashem wanted us, okay, to see the good, if it was really for our good, we might think what? Then he wouldn't take away the things that allow us to come close to him. He's saying, God forbid, a Jew living in those circumstances of the Warsaw Ghetto, God forbid, it wouldn't be a stretch for them, God forbid, to lose their faith in God. Okay, their ability to see the big picture. He says, Lachem ro'im b'Torah shagam shenega habatim tim'a umatmea hayta umikol makom asaba Hashem shlichut l'tovat Yisrael b'tchila tim'a zayin yamim v'achar kach nikaleh madnom. He says that's why we have to learn from the Torah Kadosha, from this example in the Torah, the story of the tzara, the nega tzara b'bayit, that the Torah tells us that we come into our house and it seems like we're being struck. But then ultimately what? It's revealed at some point that there's ultimate good. And he says, it starts 7 days, it's tamev, and then the goodness, the treasure is revealed. And that's why a person has to say, it appears to me, from my limited human perspective as an affliction has come upon the house. And even a Talmud Chacham that knows with certainty that this is an affliction, okay, Rak Kenega Yomar, he has to say, appears to me. Only he has to say what? From my limited human perspective, it looks to me as if there's an affliction. Aval ba'emet tovahi liYisrael asher yativ Hashem imanu. The truth is that there's going to be ultimate good that's going to result from that affliction that appears in the house for the Jewish people, and so too Hashem will bring good to us as well, says the Rebbe. That's the first powerful piece. Okay, we're now going to learn another very beautiful short piece. We're going to learn two, maybe three more short pieces from the Rabbi. We're going to learn a powerful piece from Parsha Shlach. Okay, everyone knows the story of Parsha Shlach, the story of the Meraglim. The Meraglim come and they have all these seemingly less than positive things to say about coming into Eretz Yisrael. They talk about how the people are fierce and the cities are heavily fortified and it's going to be difficult for us, etc., etc. And then along comes Kalev ben Yefuna and Yoshua ben Nun, and the Pasuk Lama tells us, text number 4, Vayas Kalev et ha'am el Moshe vayomer. And Kalev quiets down the people before Moshe. You can imagine, they hear the report from the Meraglim, and all of OUisrael is suddenly what? They're going crazy. What are we going to die? What do we do? What's going on here? Why does Hashem want us to go there? And Kalev quiets everyone down and says, Alo na'aleh v'yarashnu otah, we shall go up, okay, we shall surely go up and settle the land, ki achol nuchal la, because it's within our capability to do so. Without any rhyme or reason, without any rational disputation of the various complaints of the Meraglim, simply, we shall go up and take the land because we can. I remember there was a certain presidential candidate, without not taking sides, a number of years ago that said, yes, we can, and won the election. Kalev basically gives a similar pep talk. He says, why should we go to the land of Israel? Because we're capable of doing so. It's a gift, by the way, in our generation, okay? It's a pillow to me that in today's day and age, when El Al is flying, I mean, even in a wartime, El Al is flying regularly here to Eretz Yisrael. How are people not realizing the gift that is to come to this land? But that's exactly the message of Kalev. Kalev's like, we shall come because we can. So take a look at what the Eish Kodesh does with these psukim. V'navi, this is text 5. V'navi na hameraglim dvarim shalta mesecha amru. Efes ki aza'am ha'yosheh ba'aretz v'harim b'tzor gedolot ma'od v'gam yaldei anak ra'inu sham. He says, let's understand this. He says the Meraglim give very thought out, rational reasons for why they don't think we should go to the land. The people are fierce, we saw the children of giants there, the cities are heavily fortified. Okay? V'lam hatocheach Kalev imayim listor et sichlam b'divrei ta'amehem. Then Kalev, why doesn't Kalev try to argue with them? Okay, I don't know about you guys, but I was on the debate team in high school, right? So what do you learn about in debate when you practice for a debate? Okay, if you have the opposing team, the opposing side presents X, Y, and Z as fact, what's our job to contradict them? To what? To debunk what they presented as factual. Same with any defense attorney, okay? If the prosecutor presents a certain case, then a defense attorney's job is what? To try to debunk the information that's been presented as factual. Okay, but Kalev doesn't do this, says the Rebbe. He says, why doesn't he do that? He only says, let's go up because we can. Now listen what the Rebbe does with that pasuk, that statement by Kalev ben Yefuna. Aval kach sricha liot emunat isha Yisraeli. He says, Kalev is teaching us an eternal message. This is the way a Jew's faith has to be. Lo bilva b'shah sheroeh mavo v'derech lishuato gam al pi sichlo v'derech hateva ya'amin b'Hashem sheyoshiehu v'yitchazek. So not only in those moments when a person can look with their own intellect and see a natural way out from a challenging situation and therefore be encouraged and strengthen themselves and persevere. No, a Jew has to believe always, even when we don't see those natural ways out. Rak gam b'shah she'eino roeh chas yeshu mavo apiseicho v'derech hateva lishuato yamin b'Hashem sheyoshiehu v'yitchazek b'emunato b'tichuno. But even in those moments, what? When we don't see any natural way out. It doesn't appear to us that there's any way that we're going to be saved. No, a Jew still has to believe what? Yeshuat Hashem ke'eref ayin. That Hashem can indeed bring the salvation at the blink of an eye. And he takes it a step further. V'adarabah, b'shazu. He says, quite the contrary. B'shazu. What's b'shazu? At this moment, what we're living through. Okay? Tov shelo yitakesh limso eza seichel mavo al derech hateva. Ki kevan shal pi pashut lo yimtza. As chas chalila tuchal emunatal yedeza lihipagem. Wow. He says, in our circumstances, what? It's better not to look for a natural way out. Why? Because when we do, what's going to happen? We're going to come and realize that it looks hopeless, and we're going to feel helpless, and we're going to become devastated and depressed, and our faith in God, our trust in God is going to become damaged, impaired, deficient. And what happens when our faith becomes tainted like that? Okay? The Rebbe says that if a person's faith becomes damaged or impaired, then what can happen? That could be the impediment to the Yeshua coming. Now, what does this mean? I want to share with you a very powerful idea from another great Hasidic master, Tzedakah Cohen of Lublin. Tzedakah Cohen of Lublin, who died in the around 1910, if I'm not mistaken. He asked a very, very famous question about Leil HaSeder. Leil HaSeder, the Magi begins in Leil HaSeder with the words, Halach ma'anya diachala avatana da'ar b'Mitzrayim. This is the matzah, this bread that we eat, this matzah we eat on the Leil HaSeder, is the matzah, represents the matzah that our ancestors ate, okay, when they were in servitude in Mitzrayim. It's matzah, in the beginning of the Seder, we declare that matzah is what? The slaves' rations, okay, that Am Yisrael ate for the 210 years that they were enslaved in Mitzrayim. All right? And then later on in the Seder, when Rabbi Gamliel comes and teaches us that there are three things we need to speak about and discuss in great detail, and if we don't do that, we don't fulfill the mitzvah of Sipor Yitzias Mitzrayim. Those three things are we have to talk about the Karban Pesach, the matzah, and the maror. What does Rabbi Gamliel give us the reason for why we eat matzah? Because Hashem took us out quickly from Mitzrayim, and there was no time for the ugot matzot to rise. So Tzedek asks a question. He says, which is it? Okay? Is matzah representative of the slaves' rations, or does matzah represent the fact that we left quickly, great haste? So what's the answer? But the answer, Tzedek says, is both. But then he goes on to ask another question and says, but let's think about this. If indeed it's both, and if indeed the Jews have been eating matzah for 210 years, and they believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they see that Hashem's got their back. He's just turned the world upside down with all the makos, right? So for 210 years, all they've had to eat is matzah. And they're baking bread of their own finally. And Hashem has just turned the world upside down and demonstrated that He's got their back. So you don't let the bread rise an extra few minutes, an extra half an hour, and you finally have a nice bilkala or a marble rye or something like. It's a good question. It's a good kasha, right? So listen to what Rav Tzadok says. Rav Tzadok says, what we learn from this is that sometimes HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings us a moment, an opportunity, opens up a window to experience Yeshuot in our lives. And if we are constantly open to those moments, our eyes, our minds, and our hearts, if we really believe and put our faith in Hashem, Yeshuot Hashem Ke'arafayim, if we really believe that motto, that we believe wholeheartedly that Hashem can literally bring a Yeshua at the blink of an eye, then we're always ready for to seize those opportunities, to jump through those windows as they open up for us. But if we're blind to it, if we've given up, if we don't believe that that's possible, then what could happen? God forbid. That's exactly what the Rebbe of Piaseczna is saying in this piece. When those moments of opportunities open up, we won't see them. And therefore, says the Rebbe, the most important thing is that a Jew has to believe and put their full faith and trust in the Rebbe Shalom. Okay? Even when we're in pain, even when we're in difficult circumstances. Because God forbid, what can happen if our faith is tainted? That when those opportunities do come our way, if we no longer believe it's possible, then what's going to happen? We're going to miss the boat. Okay? And now, just to finish this piece off. Rak sarich lemor. And listen to what the Rebbe does here, because he takes exactly the words of Kaleb ben Yefuna and talks about their circumstances in the Warsaw Ghetto. Rak sarich lemor, hakol emet. Rather, we have to say everything is true. It's true. The people who are dwelling amongst us are fierce. Keinim advarim. The words are correct. Ha'arim b'tzurah dolomod. That the cities are indeed heavily fortified. Umikol makom hineni ma'amin b'Hashem shulamala me'agvul v'ateva shiyoshienu. And there, despite that, I put my full faith in the Ribono Shalom, who's beyond any limitation of nature, that He will indeed redeem us. Alon na'alev yerashno ota, below seichel, below svara, v'amuna bitachon kazeh b'Hashem mikarev et Yeshuatenu. He says, we should surely go up. We believe this kind of level and faith in Hashem and trust in Hashem will speedily bring our redemption, will bring our redemption closer. So I'll just share one story about this piece. So many of you have met my father-in-law, Rabbi Snow. He should live and be well, and please God to be back with us to learn together with us soon. But Rabbi Snow, for many years, is the rabbi of the Young Israel Bethel of Borough Park in Brooklyn. And Po V'Sham, he and I like to, when we have time, we like to try to learn a little bit throughout the week, share ideas about the Sedra, things we're going to share in our Shiurim, our Drashos. I think about 10 years ago, I happened to share this Torah the week of Parshat Shlach with my father-in-law, and he shared it in his shul in Borough Park in Brooklyn, okay? Now fast forward about 7 months later, and my in-laws were here at the time. They hadn't yet made Aliyah, but now they have, Baruch Hashem. They were here at the time visiting, and my father-in-law and I went to the Kotel, and a Hasidic gentleman stops us when we get to the Kotel, and he says to my father-in-law, "Are you Rabbi Snow?" And my father-in-law says, "Yes." And he says, "I want you to know that many months ago, I was in your shul in Borough Park, and you shared an idea for the Piaseczna Rebbe. I had just gone through a painful divorce. My family was very upset at me that I left that shidduch and left that." Again, he was from a Hasidic family, a young man. And I decided, you know what, I need to heed the Rebbe's words, and I need to move on. And he came to Eretz Yisrael and decided that speech inspired him to come see if he can make it here in Israel. And he said that he had Baruch Hashem made Aliyah and had just become engaged. He wanted to invite us to the L'chaim that evening. We didn't go, but the Rebbe's words, Yeshuat Hashem Ke'arafayim. I want to learn quickly, and I know it's the hours late, we have 10 more minutes. I want to learn one last piece that is probably, there's a defining Torah of the Piaseczna Rebbe that I like to share, and that I probably shared about 1,500 times, I'm not kidding, this year. It's this piece from Purim of 1940 in the Warsaw Ghetto. I can't think of a more challenging speaking assignment for a rabbi. What do you share on Purim in the Warsaw Ghetto? And this year we had 2 months. We had 2 months of Adar, so I must have shared this piece of Torah probably 50 times or more during those 2 months. And we're going to learn it together very quickly now. And the Rebbe points to the very, very important teaching and well-known teaching in the Tikkunei Zohar that Purim is like Yom Kippur. Okay, the Torah calls Yom Kippur, Yom Kippurim, and the Tikkunei Zohar says that therefore Yom Kippur is like Purim, Yom Kippurim, and the Rabbi Yisrael Rishon famously said that if the Torah calls it a Yom Kippurim, that means that Yom Kippur is being compared to Purim, which means that the lesser day of Yom Kippur is being compared to the greater day of Purim. Okay? That's a whole different discussion for before Purim. We'll learn this Torah again, but let's learn what the Rebbe does with this piece. Ashar meramez gam lozeh shekamo Yom Kippurim matani v'atshuva b'yom zeh lo imrotze otam adam lasotam oseh rak bein imrotze ben lo mekayma mimnei gzeret HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Says the Rebbe, what does it mean that these 2 days are likened? He says, well, first of all, let's start with Yom Kippur. No one wakes up on Yom Kippur morning, says the Rebbe, and says, I'm so excited to fast for 20. Okay, he says, why do we do it? Why do we fast in Yom Kippur? We do it because Hashem tells us we have to. He says, Kain Gam Simcha Purim. So too the joy we're meant to feel on Purim. Lo rakim adam me'atzmo b'simcha o kopanim b'matzah shechol lismoach l'samech that's what tzarich lismoach rak gam im hu b'shiflus b'shrias alev. Says not only is it when a person's in a good mood and it's easy for us to be happy, should we be happy on Purim? But even if a person is depressed and brokenhearted, hamoach v'kol rucho nirmas, his entire spirit has been crushed. It's a chok on this day of Purim that we have to find and allow some spark of simcha to enter into our hearts. V'chein gam milmala lamata, says the Rebbe. So too from above, directed down below. Just as the famous Gemara in Yuma, where Rebbe says that the very essence of the day of Yom Kippur brings kapara, even if we haven't fully done shuva. Kain gam Purim. Okay, so too Purim. Even if a Jew is not as happy as we're really meant to be on Purim, and therefore all the things we're supposed to do on Purim are incomplete. They're done half-heartedly, or we can't really do them like we're meant to normally to rejoice. Think about this. What was Shalach Manas in the Warsaw Ghetto? Okay, today we go crazy with Shalach Manas to bring something to our neighbor to make them happy. Okay, what was Shalach Manas in the Warsaw Ghetto? A moldy crust of bread and a rotten onion. Think about this. He says, despite this, even if a Jew can't be as happy as we're really meant to be, and therefore all of the mitzvahs that we're meant to do on Purim are not truly complete, Mikol makom ha'yeshua v'asimcha shapurim poel Yisrael, gam ata poel v'oseh. That the Yeshua, the salvation and joy that Purim brings metaphysically to the Jewish people, it's happening even now. There's some spark of salvation and happiness that's coming from above, projected down to us, even now in the Warsaw Ghetto, says the Rebbe on Purim. And therefore we have to tap into that and allow ourselves to tap into that energy of being besimcha. At any rate, the Rebbe's Yahrzeit is coming up next week, Daled Cheshvan. May his inspirational Torah that we got to learn together with him, as we said, based on the introduction today, may continue to be a source of inspiration and chizuk for us, even as we navigate these difficult and unprecedented times. And may indeed we be strengthened to know that, and to put our full trust and faith, and to know that indeed Yeshuat Hashem Karavayin, that Hashem can bring miracles at the blink of an eye, even throughout this difficult period. I think we've already seen a couple of examples of the miraculous things coming at the blink of an eye. May we be blessed to see the Yeshua, the Geula Shlema, Bekarov, Yeshuat Hashem Karavayin. All right, so next week, the schedule again for next week, we're going to learn at 9:15. Next week, I'll just give a commercial for the class next week. We're going to learn from two great Hasidic masters who both made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael ahead of the Nazis, Yimach Shemam. That is the Avodas Elazar of Kushnitz, who's actually the brother-in-law of the Rebbe we just learned from, as well as the Ohale Yaakov, the Rebbe of Hasiyatan, who was lovingly known as the Admor HaTzioni. We're actually going to learn a few beautiful pieces from each of these two Rebbes that are going to speak to the question of Achdut Ba'am Yisrael, Kan Be'eretz Yisrael, and I think would give us some very relevant and powerful food for thought as well. So that's the commercial for next week. Shakoach. Have a great Shabbos.